The year 2000 was a big year for me. It didn't hurt that major career and personal transitions aligned with the change of a century and a millennium. I had just drained the 90s for all it had in reframing my own musical influences and inspirations, and the velocity of this pivotal transitional era was immediate. I needed something or someone to help fill in the path in front of me. So enter two primary figures. First, John in the Morning, foundational DJ for KEXP in Seattle and their early technology online access, which was awesome. And then shortly after, in the line of late 90s program Brave New Waves by the publicly funded CBC, came Radio 3, a fully online format championing Canadian independent music, and its anchor afternoon host, Grant Lawrence. In short, Grant Lawrence is an award-winning writer, musician, broadcaster, and live event host. He's the author of 4 best-selling books for adults, most recently his latest #1 bestseller, Return to Solitude, in 2022, and his first children's picture book, Bailey the Bat and the Tangled Moose. Following his success with breakout 90s indie band The Smugglers, Grant translated his frontman persona into endearing host and tastemaker with Radio 3 and all of the spin-offs, including creation of some of the earliest podcasts. And he continues his public hosting work with CBC Music currently. This is Almost Famous Enough. I'm your host, Glenn Erickson, and thank you for spending your time with us today. This is Grant Lawrence. It is what it is. But how are you doing? How are you feeling?
I'm great. It's great to see you, and thank you so much for having me.
Oh, well, thank you so much for taking the time to jump on here. You know, in all the people I know in the industry, you have a very unique character and history and story in it. It weaves into a lot of other people I know, their story. I've always been very interested in it. I think there's lots of little insights and lots of little things I'd love to talk with you about in the life of what people pursue, whether it be music or adjacent. So I was hoping we could just dig into some of that stuff.
Sure.
Of course, I greatly appreciate that, you're wearing that great little flannel underneath, which just feels
My Mac jacket.
So Canadian, and you've always had such stuff. By the way, I wore this for you. My family got me this. I love black on black, and
okay.
And so they
oh
got
yeah,
me this,
I see. There's a CBC.
Yeah,
there's
the CBC logo, black on black.
Okay, I'm picking it up.
Literally my favorite hoodie, so I had to wear it today. So I might as well just ask you the question right off the bat. Through different eras, you've always had some iconic fashion element, like the rubber boots when you were in a band, and then the sweater. And I know that there's a great Canadian debate on which term to call it, a curation sweater or a Siwash, but you have that custom sweater with the CBC in it.
Yeah. I have that sweater, and I haven't worn it in years. It's in my office at the CBC. I remember, wearing that sweater, you learn. I just grew up, that's one of the great things. One of the CBC features we did, which I think you guys took part in. We had a feature called the Canadian Dictionary. And we learned that this country is so big and so wide that, you can grow up with a certain set of vocabulary or vernacular or whatever in, say, BC, where I grew up, and where, this is a Mac jacket that I'm wearing. That sweater that you're referring to, we grew up calling it a cowichan, because that's a West Coast term. Cowichan First Nation on Vancouver Island, famous for weaving those wool sweaters. And then we found out that in the prairies it was known as a Siwash. And then I found out that in the East it's just called a curling sweater.
They just call it a curling sweater. Oh,
they just call it a curling sweater. But it's the same thing with, cottage, cabin, camp.
Yep.
Another one, what you're wearing right now, which has, I think it's an American term is hoodie, but in Saskatchewan they call that very specifically a bunny hug.
Yeah, because of the pouch.
I guess because
so
of the
I grew up
pouch,
Saskatchewan, so yeah, I'm familiar with that term.
Yeah, but I mean, when I was a kid, those were called kangaroo hoodies.
Oh wow.
Yeah, because of the pouch.
Because of the pouch.
So there's all this different, and I love that about Canada. And I think we did a Canadian dictionary with your old band, the Wheat Pool, and I'm pretty sure you got I got you guys to tell us about like the phenomenon of the grain elevators across the prairies.
You know what? I was you said that, and I'm like, did we? But now that you say that, I do remember my great grandfather was a part of. It was like a union movement, essentially, kind of what happened with grain elevators, and he was a part of about getting that going. So
yeah, and now there are these iconic landmarks, across the flatlands of our country that are somewhat endangered, but are definitely classic. Yeah. And loved your band. Loved the anthemic nature of your songs. Still love them, and it's funny that I only just thought of that feature for the first time in a long time, just as we chatted.
Oh, that's great. Well, I know, like a funny story for me. So in the work I'm doing right now, I've had to go out to the island a few times, and one time I landed in Victoria, and then I rented a car to get up to Nanaimo. And so I literally went to stop for lunch, and there was like the great big sign about curation for the road sign. And like right underneath it was an unhoused fellow with his signs and his paraphernalia, and he was wearing a curation sweater, like right underneath. And I was like, okay, I'm going to say Grant is right, and it's a curation. It's not. I grew up in Saskatchewan. We called it Siwash, but it totally makes sense when you see it in context.
Yeah.
But it is a pretty great thing about the country. And I do appreciate you saying that about the band and your interest that you had. I think I don't mind jumping in even right there. Like our introduction is probably goes all the way back to 2007, 2008, when we released our first record. So I've had an interview with Dan Mangan. We've talked for the podcast, and him and I share this really similar story, but in a different way, where kind of at the top of the list for us right at that time was getting your attention. And
that's interesting.
And then so in 2008 in January, I think you released a podcast about the ones to watch for that year or something, and we were both on it. Yeah. So that's how we discovered him and I. That's how we discovered each other and each other's music. And
that's really nice.
From there, we ended up crossing paths all the time across the country, playing shows and festivals and being at conferences.
And I'm still really good friends with Dan. He's coming over for dinner tomorrow night with his family and his kids, and we travel with them, and they're like pretty close family friends now.
That's pretty great. It's pretty great to be able to look back and have those things evolve the way they have and have relationships.
Yeah, I mean that's something that I really hold dearly. Is, I've always said this, like, I was in a band, my own band, the Smugglers. There's some paraphernalia behind you there, or behind me rather, but you can sell a bunch of records, and you can or not, and you can tour the world or not, or whatever. But what I really think is the most valuable thing that I take away from my music career is the friends, and the connections made. And I know there's no money in that, but really at the end of the day, I value the friendships that I've made through music. I love the music, and I love having a roof over my head and all that kind of stuff. But the friendship thing is just so important to me. And I really value it a lot. And I have friends that are, my wife Jill is a touring musician. She's, I don't think this is announced yet, but she is going to be playing in Japan in the summertime.
Oh, wow.
And I still have friends in Japan, Japanese musician friends from when the Smugglers toured there, like 25 years ago.
That's amazing.
Still friends with them. And my son, who's 11, is really into punk rock now, and we're gonna go up to, Tokyo and check out some of the punk rock culture that's still around in that massive city.
That's got to be pretty exciting feeling to start sharing those experiences with your son now.
Oh yeah, and I haven't just started. I mean, he's fully entrenched. Like, he has his own band. He has his own band called Blue Jay Valley.
Oh,
they have
wow.
their own record out. He's 11 years old. It's original songs that him and his friends write. Is like the whole deal, blue vinyl. And they play shows and they make their own posters. And so it's very much like the way I grew up with Nardwuar and the Smugglers and the Evaporators. But we did all this when we were teenagers, like 15, 16, 17, 18, doing the all ages shows and the postering and the records. And my son is doing it at a very, like he's doing it at a very, very young age. But, they charge $10 for tickets. They do all ages shows. I help them out a lot. I kind of help Josh design the posters for shows, making sure like it's readable and, the date is really important. And, but nowadays what they do, I mean, back when me and Nardwuar were putting on all ages shows, we'd make a poster and it would say at the bottom, tickets available at Track Records, Capers Grocery Store, Harry's Market, whatever. And now you just put a QR code on there.
Yeah, it's
and all you have to do is the kids or the parents scan the code with their phone and boom, you can buy tickets standing right there in front of the poster on the telephone pole, and boom, you have tickets. So I'm enjoying the technological advances in rock and roll show promotion that didn't exist when I was a teenager.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like there's a difference, unless you think there is. You're welcome to tell me. I don't think there's a difference in the level of hustle required. It's just
no, there's not. I mean, it's all about energy.
Yeah, but before, what you were describing for us, you put all that hustle in, and then you had no idea, like, whether it would work. You know what I mean? Like, it was just a poster on a telephone pole, or if you got lucky, up in the local record store, right? But
all those old school methods still work. The biggest discovery that I've made, and it's a happy discovery, and I can't believe it. It's just simple mathematics. Is when you're a kid band, people tend to buy tickets in groups of 4 because of families. So like, kid points at a poster, I want to go to that, and then they're like, okay, well then the sibling goes and the parents go, and so they buy tickets 4 at a time.
Yeah.
As opposed to when we would sell tickets to gigs, we're often selling, 1 ticket at a time, or 2 tickets at a time, or 3 if we're lucky. So their shows sell out quickly because the tickets are selling in multiples of 4. And I was saying to I was telling Nardwuar this. I'm like, we started way too late. We were selling tickets to individuals. We should have been selling tickets to families.
Yeah.
But that has been a revelation for me. But all the old methods, making a paper poster, putting it up, all that still works. I swear to it, in my shows still too. Like, I always insist. I do a touring show. Is kind of like my retirement project. I do my own touring show now that isn't very rock and roll. It's called Grant Lawrence and Friends, an evening of stories and songs, and it's kind of inspired by the Vinyl Cafe. So I tell stories from my books and podcasts and stuff like that. And then my favorite musicians, BC area musicians, will play songs, often acoustically or solo, between my stories. And we still do old school. Of course there's Facebook, and of course there's Instagram and all those annoying things. but we still poster towns. We still put up posters in the local cafes. We still put up posters at the community center. We still put up posters on poles. And if it's a tour, we always try to have someone on the ground in that city or town. We do a lot of tours to small towns and islands in BC. And I always say, hey, could you please put up some posters at the cafe or, the library or whatever. It still matters. That on the street publicity still matters and works. It's not all online yet.
Yeah. I mean, this is great. This is what I knew would be fun, is that already in like 10 minutes, we've jumped around your entire career.
We jumped around a lot.
From the very back to the front to stuff, which is exactly how it should be.
I don't know if you probably have like an order you want to go in. So reel me in.
No, you've done this for a lot of years. You try to prepare if you make sure that you don't get lost if you're supposed to anchor something. That's all. But when I was preparing, I always look for what sort of stands off the page to me. So what stood off the page to me was like, essentially, if we're gonna talk like a timeline, we're talking like the Grant Lawrence Eras tour. And so tell me if I'm right, but it feels like your band and the Smugglers that basically took up your 20s. And
that's right.
Then you transitioned over, and there's overlap, don't get me wrong, but then you transition over to CBC Radio, which eats up most of your 30s, and you release, you write your first book and publish it in 2010, and you're basically ushering in your 40s. So in some ways it's kind of distinct eras, but a lot of overlap. And I guess for me, I'm interested in the overlap and how somebody moves through the business, so to speak. But a lot of it is by necessity,
by financial necessity. I mean, the Smugglers, I always thought I knew I was going to be in the entertainment industry in some way, shape, or form from a very, very early age. But I thought my dad really got me into movies, old Hollywood classic films. And I thought I was going to either be an actor or a director or a writer for films. And then in high school, rock and roll took over in a big way. Got really, really into music. Very, very fortunate. I've told this story before, but very fortunate to have Nardwar be a couple of years up on me in high school and him being a major leader. And our high school was supposed to be this athletic high school, but we had all sorts of great bands. Spirit of the West went to our high school. Barney Bentall went to our high school. And then more in our era, we had Nardwar and the Evaporators and bands like She Stole My Beer. And Nardwar started, the real pivotal thing was he started booking live bands. We would have canned DJs, and he said, no, there's so many amazing bands in downtown Vancouver right now. We got to bring them out to our suburban high school. So he started booking the Grapes of Wrath and DOA and the Enigmas and Art Bergman and Skaboom and all sorts of different genres, but all alternative. And that was hugely influential for myself and basically a generation of kids. There's so many musicians that came out of that school.
Wow.
And so the Smugglers formed out of that. And that was when we formed when we were about 16, 17 years old. And that just ruled my life, as you say, like in my late teens and all of my 20s.
Did you think that was it? Like that was going to be the thing?
Yeah, I thought that was it. I'm like, okay, it's music. This is it. I'm going to be in this band forever because we really did have a lot of longevity and we had a lot of success. We were on Mint Records in Canada. Our records, we put out a string of records. Some of them are up here on the wall.
Okay.
All those records would go to number one. Every single one of them would go to number one on campus radio in Canada, like one after the other, after the other, after the other. Now that does not really add up to, financial success, but we did well. We would do well in the clubs, which we were totally happy with. We were absolutely 100% satisfied with a full 300 person club, because we believed that if once you started getting bigger than that, you started losing the magic of compression. So I call it rock and roll compression. And the perfect, in my opinion, and the Beatles knew this too. Like when they played small places like the Cavern Club in Liverpool or the Rathskeller in Hamburg, they were long and they were narrow and they had low ceilings. And that's what keeps the compression in and makes it sound really, really good. And so when we would walk into a club that was designed like that, we go, oh, this is going to be a great show. It's going to be a sweat box. It's going to be awesome. But when we'd walk into some place we'd play like an airport hangar in Italy or something like that, and the ceiling is way, way up and it's 100 feet long. It's like a football field. We go, oh man, this is going to sound terrible. This is going to be a bad show. So that sort of going off on a tangent, but that was basically what I thought I was going to do. Then I was working at Mint Records as my day job between touring, our Canadian label. And I was working a lot with Lookout Records in Berkeley, California, who put out our American, they put out the American versions of our records, and everything was going great. And then there was a crash. There was an industry crash right around 1998. And a lot of people don't remember this crash, but it was kind of like a boom bust echo. So the boom was like Nirvana and Green Day in the early 90s. That was kind of like almost like our version of the Rolling Stones and the Beatles in North America. Like grunge and punk came roaring back, alternative in the early 90s. That was the boom. And then there was the inevitable bust. Everyone kind of overextended themselves, putting out too many records. Distributors were overextending their credit lines. And then the big part of the crash in Canada was that Cargo Distribution went bankrupt. And they held a ton of Mint Records, and they owed all sorts of labels, all sorts of money, and they couldn't pay it. And so that was extremely devastating for Mint. And all of a sudden they looked at me, because the two owners looked at me and said, I don't know, man, I was the publicist there. I don't know if we're going to be able to pay you. How do you feel about volunteering? And I'm like, well, I got to pay my rent too. So I started looking for another job in the late 90s. And I had a friend, Leora Kornfeld at CBC, who did a show called Real Time. And she said, yeah, we might have a researcher's job for you, which was the lowest rung on the CBC ladder. And she got me in 98 as a researcher at the CBC. And I worked for a show called Radio Sonic with two of my broadcasting heroes, David Wisdom and Leora Kornfeld. They were the hosts. My job was to research the rheostatics. They're coming in, what are we going to talk about? And all those bands of that era of the late 90s in Canada. And then I just stuck, and I went from things moved really quickly. I became a host of the late night overnight show in around 2000. And then by 2001, both David Wisdom and Leora Kornfeld somewhat quickly moved on, and I became the host of this show called Radio Sonic, which was Saturday night prime time live across Canada. And I remember fatefully my first show, the radio seasons start in September and go to basically June, and very much like the school year. And my first ever Radio Sonic broadcast was the Saturday immediately following 9/11.
Oh, I remember reading that.
9/11 was on a Tuesday, September 11th, 2001. And my first primetime hosting slot was on that Saturday, whatever that would be, a few days later, 4 days later. And I remember being completely nervous about it, and I'm like, how am I supposed to do this? The world is in shock. The world is in mourning, most of the world anyway. And I didn't know what to do. I thought people were going to start reading into every single song and every single lyric. And a really sage producer who's no longer with us, Susan Engelbert, said, you know what? Just entertain. People just need a break. Just music is therapy. Just play the music, be yourself, and provide people with the break, the entertainment. And that was excellent advice. And it is really the role of the entertainer, and that stuck with me for my whole life. It's the role of the entertainer to this day. We are the therapy. We are the court jesters. We are the minstrels. We provide the break. We provide the laugh. It's entertainment. Yeah. And so that's what I have always believed. And I thank that producer for giving me that advice. So that's how I transitioned into CBC. And, I've now been there. 98 to 2024. That's, what is that? 20.
Yeah, it's a good 26 years right there.
Yeah, 26 years.
Half your life. Half your life, Grant.
Yeah, and now these days I host the CBC Music Top 20, which is the most mainstream thing I've ever done in my entire life. Playing songs by Beyonce and Chappell Roan and all sorts of The Cure have a comeback album out right now. And so I'm talking about all these artists, and I'm like, man, I'm used to talking about the Wheat Pool and the Weaker Thans and Joel Plaskett, and now I'm talking about Beyonce.
Yeah. So I'm interested in your takeaways at this stage of your life, looking back on your 20s era in the band, because you identified something I had wanted to ask you about as well, which is just the explosion of indie music. I feel like, and this is why I really like talking to you about this, because you have such a great observation on scenes and the music industry. I feel like Canada had two kind of explosions of indie, and the one in the 90s and then the early 2000s with the Arcade Fire and
you got it. So basically going back to that boom bust echo theory, in the 90s there was the boom, and it all goes in waves, right? So in the early 90s there was that boom, then there was the bust, and then there was the echo. What is the echo? Well, the low point was the late 90s, but out of ashes grow sprouts, right?
Yeah.
And so what we saw, there was a couple of down years in those late 90s, but what we saw, this record right behind me, the Weaker Thans, Left and Leaving, all-time classic. It's their second album, and it came out in the year 2000.
Yeah.
So in the year 2000, we started seeing the bubbling of the echo. And then we had the New Pornographers, who were a bunch of sort of middling musicians in the Vancouver scene that were having sort of so-so success in a bunch of different bands, all come together and become greater than the sum of their parts and explode into this bombastic, kind of Fleetwood Mac through a distortion pedal bliss. And that record came out in 2000 as well. And those records were the foundation of the next major boom, which may never be replicated, of Canadian independent music in the early to mid 2000s, where you had some of the biggest exports on the alternative level that we've ever had. Classic story of the Rheostatics or the Tragically Hip is they were not able to break in the States. Well, in the early to mid 2000s, all of a sudden we see bands like Hot Hot Heat on Sub Pop breaking internationally, England and the United States. We, of course, had another Victoria band, Wolf Parade, exploding, and then Montreal becoming, the new Seattle, and Arcade Fire and Stars, and then Toronto blowing up with Broken Social Scene and the Hidden Cameras and Metric and Death from Above. And the one thing that all these bands had in common is that they were breaking internationally. So they were becoming like the Unicorns, whatever. They were like the it band of South by Southwest, or they were breaking in Europe, or they were breaking in Japan. And really the country that is always the one that a lot of musicians want to crack is the United States. And every single band that I just mentioned did and still do phenomenally in the United States. I mean, Stars just did a sold-out U.S. tour for the 20th anniversary of Set Yourself on Fire.
Yeah.
You know, sold out in New York, sold out in San Francisco. This is amazing, right?
Amazing.
20 years later. And so that was that major period. Feist was right in there as well. And, you know, a lot of these careers are still riding that period of success in from 20 years ago. And right in the thick of all of that, by a pure luck / stroke of genius / whatever you call it, was the CBC Radio 3 podcast, which was the first ever original podcast from the CBC, created by my visionary boss, Steve Pratt. I had nothing to do with it but this, you know, just talking into a microphone and talking about the songs. I wasn't even pegged as the original host. They had a host in there that didn't click. They brought me in, and this was when it was all like, all this music was just coming from everywhere, all over Canada. You know, every single week there was like Deadly Snakes, Cuff the Duke, you know, The Wheat Pool, Dan Mangan, Said the Whale, 2 Hours Traffic. It was like nonstop, Winter Sleep, and it was all good. You know, Joel Plaskett breaking out. I mean, it was from all over the country, and it was all good. And hip hop was having a moment too at that time. Really great independent hip hop out of places like Brandon, Manitoba, and Halifax, you know, not Toronto.
Yeah.
I mean, there was always great stuff coming from Toronto, but it was so interesting to see this weird hip hop scene rising out of Brandon and Winnipeg, the Peanuts and Corn crew with McEnroe and Bird of Prey and all those guys. And Halifax, you know, Classified.
Yeah,
I mean,
Classified was great.
You know, a hero to many to this day. So that was very, very exciting. And the podcast was able to provide a soundtrack to that revolution of Canadian music. And so right time, right place. And that, I don't know, like that scene did have its own kind of bust, maybe, in my opinion, around 8 to 10 years later, when indie rock really started moving into kind of more of it was still popular. Like, you know, I don't want to throw them under the bus, but, you know, that sort of Mac DeMarco style of a little lighter, a little more electronic, a little more yachty. And, but because Mac DeMarco did incredibly well too.
Yeah.
But I, you know, being from Canada, Tegan and Sarah, they're another example of a real breakout from that period. I mean, they're celebrating the 20th anniversary of So Jealous right now, which was their breakout record with Walking with a Ghost and all that on it, that the White Stripes covered. So it was a very, very good time to be a Canadian band. We were very, very red hot exports, arguably for the first time since, I don't know, the Guess Who and Neil Young.
Well, that's how it got
instead of
talked
just
about,
one or
for sure.
Yeah, Guess Who, Neil Young, Joni Mitchell, that era, the band.
Yeah.
But they often didn't really identify that strongly. I mean, I guess the Guess Who did, but you know, Gordon Lightfoot, they often moved to the States.
Yeah.
Didn't come back.
Yeah.
A lot of them are back now, but a lot of the musicians that I just mentioned are still living in Canada, still living in Vancouver, Montreal, Toronto, Halifax. And
well, that boom was pretty, like, for me, like, that was extremely formative. I mean, there were
you were part of it.
Well, even prior to that, though, I think it was, I guess I'll say it was probably the beacon for me in my desires, right? That, like, even prior to discovering Radio 3, I had discovered Brave New Waves, right? Which was
right. Yeah. I mean, Brave New Waves was huge in the 80s and 90s for a generation.
Yeah. And it was the indie version of Video Hits for me to see.
Yeah. I mean, it was the first place I heard,
bands.
Yeah, first place I heard No Means No. First place I heard Shadowy Men on a Shadowy Planet. Those types of bands. And yeah, Radio 3 kind of became like the daylight version
Yeah.
of that.
Yeah.
Now, some hardcore Brave New Wave fans would argue that, but I think we took what Brave New Waves did late at night, and we brought it to the daylight, and we brought it to a much, much, much larger audience that was global.
Yeah.
And I mean, the podcast became so global that we put up a huge map on the wall at CBC Radio 3, and we used to get just a ton of mail for that show. And we would get mail from far-flung Canadians all over the world. And every time we got a letter from someplace, we'd put a pin in the map. And within a couple of years, that map just had little pins all over it. It was very exciting time.
Isn't that a delicious irony that it was so groundbreaking to me when I look back right now, so groundbreaking as this online format delivery? It was like hardly anyone was using the word podcast for a recorded thing.
I didn't know what the hell it was, and I thought it was a bad idea.
But here you're getting like physical mail still delivered to you by fans.
Oh, no, that was, I'm talking email.
Okay.
I mean, there was some physical mail, but it was like primarily email.
Well, I mean, I'm curious what your perspective in the middle of that time was, because there's this incredible boom in the music community happening and just around the world globally. And we had this unique flavor that we were delivering, which I felt really exciting. So as an aspiring musician, I had all the inspiration in front of me that I needed, right? Of people that were that I could relate to, right? Carving a path for me, people from our own neighborhoods. But to do this show that was online, and then you created this community that would like log in while you were live. Yeah. And basically it was like a chat forum. I try to explain this to people now. I said, like, it was a chat forum when nobody was really using chat forums commonly.
Yeah, and amazingly enough, it was polite and respectful.
Yeah, and it would open when your show opened, right? And then people would talk. And I remember logging in, there'd be 650, 850, 1,000 people online at any given time. I'm just curious, somebody had to be pretty visionary at CBC with all of this.
Steve Pratt.
Is it all Steve Pratt? And
I mean,
to
I
have
can't
the
give
license from a corporation.
Yeah, we had an amazing team of developers as well. I think of John Palazzi, who ran that blog, and I think of Phil Rabin, who was very creative. Scott Muck. There was a lot of Nicole Goodman, a lot of extremely creative people behind the scenes who were creating the engines. So what you're referring to here is when, the podcast was a hit, and it spawned other podcasts like the R3 Top 30, and Lisa Christensen had a talk podcast called Appetite for Distraction. And then what we moved into was when satellite radio came along, CBC Radio 3 got its own channel. And so we were simultaneously broadcasting live on Sirius XM. So that's North America. And then also just live on the web.
Yeah.
And so we would be live. We would have a live blog post going where I would put up some topic for the day and some article I'd write every single morning. I'd write some little think piece and then put it up there. And then, as you say, people would get into the comments, and they would literally have a live chat in the comments throughout the entire show. Yeah. And this would go into Lisa's show, and it would go into Craig's show and all the other shows. But it was like I was right in the middle of the day. And so people could just keep the Radio 3 window, just like I'm doing now with my ratty old headphones I see here. They would be at work, and they'd be on a computer just like we are on now, and they'd be doing their work, but one of the windows would be Radio 3, so they'd be listening to the show, and then if something struck them, they just close the window of their work, go to the Radio 3, and put in a comment.
Yeah.
To just be part of the discussion. Now, we had a front of house, diehard group of fans that would be there every single day. I'm still friends with a whole bunch of them. There's a Facebook group still dedicated to it where a lot of them communicate. And I would liken that experience in my life, that live period on Radio 3, to the television show Cheers, where I was like, Sam or Woody or whatever, the bartender, and the people, the characters that would sit around the bar were like our regulars on Radio 3, like Cliff and Norm, whatever, Frasier. And then the people that you would see that never got any lines, that were filling the bar and the seats around the Cheers bar, basically the extras on the show. Well, those were kind of our background listeners. So we had the people that listened but didn't engage.
Yeah.
So we had, and there were far more of them than there were the front of house people. Yeah. And so we had this very, very, very active audience where essentially almost characters would be created, like famous Lee Howard down in Sacramento, California, or Christine McAvoy in Vancouver, or Rebby out in St. John's, Newfoundland.
Who's the guy?
And they would become like,
was it Winnipeg or Brandon? The guy, the beer guy.
Oh yeah, there are people.
I forget that guy.
Cody LeBreau, yeah.
Cody LeBreau.
Still friends with him too, and they all had their little blog names and everything, and but they created a network of friendships, and that again lasts to this day. They started online, and they moved into, quote, real life, or whatever you want to call it. And that was, and what formed was a community with the central love of Canadian music, music in general. And that was a very, very special time. A lot of people that were involved look back on it as a magical time. And I do as well. I mean, there were times where, like, I did that show Monday to Friday live every day. And sometimes I'd be like, oh man, it's the same people day in, day out. But by the time we were wrapping up that show, because all things end, and I believe I did the last live broadcast maybe 2017, something like that. It was like a sob fest. Like everyone was crying. I was crying. The listeners were crying. The musicians that we had on special guests were crying. We kind of realized it was the end of an era. And that was when CBC Radio 3 sort of morphed into the larger, more mainstream platform of CBC Music, which still exists to this day, which is what I'm involved in now. I now identify as, Grant Lawrence from CBC Music. But yeah, that was an emotional time. And I think when it did end, that's when you realize, oh, this was actually incredibly special and a real honor. A lot of the hosts felt this way. It was such an honor to be able to have that platform, to rock out, to Matt Mays or Cadence Weapon or whatever, full volume in our little studio, and have guests come in all day long, musicians on tour, and then have our audience be in constant conversation. Yeah. So it was just fluidity. Well, emails, blog comments, phone calls. We did it all on that show. Yeah. And it was a lot of fun.
And I think the community that was built and the way you sort of characterized it there is pretty key, because I think I'm not really a historian type, but I always try to draw threads to the present. I mean, if I were to earmark one thing, I think it's interesting that in commercial radio right now, at least the ones I see around here, they're all thematically, the ones that are succeeding, the hosts are creating a program and they start a conversation. I'm using air quotes for anyone who's not listening. But
because sometimes it sounds phony.
But it's just like what you described was 25 years ago, 20 years ago, doing exactly that with your show online. You would just go online, you would find a topic, you would let a group gather around that topic or around what was happening in the music. I mean,
and what's interesting, Glenn, is a lot of the ideas, I don't know if I've ever told anyone this except for maybe producers, that a lot of the ideas that I employed or whatever, or that I used on Radio 3, I got from sports radio.
Oh, wow.
Like poll question of the day.
Yeah.
because sports radio is filled with all these little segments here and there.
Yeah.
And I got so, because, I'm a big hockey fan. And so I would listen to sports talk radio, and I got so many ideas, and people didn't even realize that these ideas were basically being poached from sports radio and then applied to music.
Yeah.
But it worked just as well.
That's pretty great. Like I love talking about that community from the perspective you have. Like my perspective, because I, like you identified earlier, was part of the band. I was the one doing most or sometimes all of the dirty grunt work of trying to get attention and find ways. Like I said earlier, Dan and I both felt like we were trying to get your attention at one point. Like one way was our band played in a beer league here, so I got us to go to the Exclaim Cup because I knew that you'd be there, and a couple other people. But I'm like, I want to talk to them in that context and build a relationship. Or when we released our second record, to the chagrin of Ken Beatty, wonderful publicist, Killbeat, I was going to Vancouver to pick up the physical copies, and I sussed out whether you would have me on the air, and you did, like pretty spur of the moment. And of course, Ken was like, that doesn't fit the publicity plan to go get it played already ahead of the advance. But I'm like, I don't care. Like, I need this time and I need
Just
this conversation.
Ken's great. I love him. He basically, I consider him my publicist too for my books and stuff like that. And but I think with your band, I was just really interested in the Canadiana of the name. Like you hooked me with your band name, which because I was always being at the CBC, we're always on the lookout for better or for worse of anything
Canadian content
strikes as Canadiana, because that way we can reflect ourselves back. We can reflect Canada back onto the listeners, and the listeners are into it. So that it wasn't too hard to hook me with you guys. Dan, it was harder because there's only one band called the Wheat Pool, but Dan Mangan, there was at the time bands were really what was hot. And singer-songwriters, dime a dozen, like, what is this guy, Hayden? Like, who does he think he is? Like, this curly-haired, who is he, Seth Rogen? Like, what is this guy? And what's his thing? And I don't know if he told you, did he tell you the story of when I first heard Dan?
No, I don't think he did, no.
Okay, well, this story has been in like Spin magazine and stuff, and I think Dan's pretty sick of it. But I used to host a really infamous kind of musicians Christmas party every year at my apartment down on Beach Avenue in the West End, and it would be an apartment, but it would be packed with everyone from the music scene, and I would get a couple of bands to play acoustically, like beside the Christmas tree. And one year, Said the Whale did it. And so I'd quiet everyone down, quiet the 120 people jammed in there. And I'd say, okay, here's Said the Whale. And they would play like 3 songs or something like that. And that was it. And then the party would rage. And then I remember this one year, Said the Whale played 3 songs acoustically. And then party starts rocking fully. Because, after the live performance, it just sort of ramps up with music and dancing and drinking and everything else. And Tyler Bancroft, still a really good friend, came up to me and said, hey, there's a guy here, a musician, and I think you should let him play. I'm like, let him play?
Yeah, big swing.
What are you talking about? He goes, I think you should let him play the party right now. I'm like, are you nuts? The party is reaching its like apex of chaos. Like, the last thing I'm going to have is some, guitarist, like the scene from Animal House where Belushi smashes the acoustic guitar over the singer-songwriter's head, like, my love gave me a flower that I just that's what I like envisioned was going to happen. And Tyler was like, trust me, this guy's name is Dan Mangan. I looked over at him. I'm like, he looks like a teddy bear or something. He's going to be eaten alive. And you know, like there were punks there, and you know, heshers, but Tyler, which he says to me a lot to this day, said, just trust me on this one. So I'm like, oh my God, this is going against all my instincts, but all right, fine. So Dan very eagerly gets out his acoustic guitar. I'm just like rolling my eyes, shaking my head. And he goes up and to the Christmas tree in the living room, and I managed to quiet everyone down. I had to do the wedding trick. I got a fork and wine glass, and that has a frequency that cuts above conversation that actually really works. So everyone quieted down. I said, hey, you know, I know you're all having a great time. I'm just going to interrupt that good time by introducing this singer-songwriter who I've never heard of, but his name's Dan Mangan. And Dan, floor is yours for a couple songs. So he did his first song. And he had this, like, as you know, he's got this, like, he doesn't use it all that much. I guess he still does, but he has this baritone. And what he did was, from playing so many thankless open mics and cafes and etc., he had developed this vocal baritone style. Well, just like the wine glass,
his growl,
but the baritone style could cut through conversation and attract attention. And he did it at this party, and everyone shut up. And I'm like, oh my God. So he did one song, Tina's Glorious Comeback or something like that. And then he followed up with Robots. And I swear to God, I was stunned. He not only played the song, and got this roaring party to pin drop silence, but he got everyone in the party singing along. Robots need love too. They want to be loved by you. And the whole apartment they've never heard the song before. No one's ever heard the song before. The whole apartment is singing the song. I'm looking around. I look at Nardwar. Nardwar looks at me, and we're like, who is this guy? And it was an incredible moment. And it was pivotal for Dan, because there was all sorts of Vancouver industry movers and shakers in that room. And all of a sudden, like, you know, the guy who booked the anthem singers for the Vancouver Canucks was at the party. And within a month, Dan was singing the anthem for the Vancouver Canucks. And so Dan was very, very, very smart, opportunistic guy. And that was my introduction to Dan Mangan.
Well, now that you tell it, he did tell me that story, but a very, very short version of it that just was about how Tyler advocated for him and you resisted. But
I did. And so there's the difference between me and...
that's a great perspective. I like, one of the things, like, when we're talking about this incredible thing that happened with this online community, Dan and I both sort of shared, was the way we put our attention on that. Like, I literally, like, the weed pool for me, right? Like, I learned later that if I really wanted a lot of money and more success, I probably should have gone after an older and a different demographic. But the indie crowd meant so much to me. I spent all my energy. So I would log in. You probably don't even remember. Sometimes I would call in and try to be the one to answer your trivia prize. And I even was successful a couple of times. But anything, because you were always so gracious as to be willing to, like, put a plug in for, like, I like your band, blah, blah, blah. But then we just do the bit. But I would go online and I was like, why don't I just start interacting with these people? Like, there's no pretension of I'm cooler than that as a band. I'm like, these are the people I want to know. And as a result, we started going across Canada, and I wanted to play all the classic venues, right? I wanted to play the Railway, and I want to play the Sidetrack here in Edmonton. I want to play the Dakota Tavern in Toronto. So I wanted to play these iconic venues. And the people that came and brought friends that I didn't know on those first tours were all Radio 3 people, right? They would come up and identify themselves.
Or they would often be wearing
or wearing
clothing.
some version
Yeah.
of something they had got, or won
like
a scarf, and
yeah,
something.
t-shirt.
But, I mean, the impact, I think it's great that you started this by talking about how you're still, like, you're friends with Dan to this day and your families do stuff. And the most important thing to you is friends. I mean, the impact of that community, I don't know if you recall it. Well, you must recall this. It was pretty, but my side of this story is after our band broke up in 2012, I went to North by Northeast that like 3 months later in June, maybe 2 months later from when we broke up. It was like still really raw for me, but my friend who's an artist now in Toronto, Vancouver originally, Adeline, Shauna, we were hanging out and she's like, you know, the Radio 3ers have a picnic at this thing every year. You should go. And I resisted because I felt this weird, I don't know, not shame or embarrassment, but the feeling of like, it's hard for me to go and talk and the band isn't together anymore. And I'm going to have to answer that question 50 times. And I was sort of just feeling too raw, or I thought I was feeling too raw to do it. Anyhow, we show up at the picnic, and you probably remember this. You were there. You were tapped to do this sort of faux wedding that you were.
Oh yeah, that wasn't a faux wedding. That was a real wedding.
Was that I thought they did the official papery stuff later.
No, that was a real wedding.
Oh, that was the real one. Okay, well there you go.
That was real. They got married.
These Radio 3ers,
Russ and Kathy.
Yeah, who met on your show in the comment section. Yes. And when we go through Windsor, he would come and see us all the time and bring us.
Yeah, he's from Dearborn, Michigan. Russ Gordon.
And he's an absolute beauty, and Kathy's absolute beauty, and they're gonna do these vows with you officiating. And
I didn't officiate. I was like a witness or something. I'm trying to remember. There was an officiant.
Okay.
Who, I think I can remember his blog name. It was X Canuck.
Oh, yeah. So yeah, he's a good friend of mine now.
He's also from the Detroit or Ann Arbor, I think.
He was originally. Yeah. He's moved around a bit since then, but
yeah. So he officiated. He got like a license. He officiated for them, and he married them. Yeah. And I was like the witness or something.
And the opening line of Kathy's vows were the line from our single from Ontario. And it was one of the most emotional, probably deeply rooted, connected feelings I've ever had as a musician in the scene.
Wow.
To just randomly show up to these people that I knew who they were and have this thing get honored in that, the importance to them. Now, fast forward when we did reunion shows like 5 years or 7 years after we did our first reunion show, Kathy and Russ and X Canuck, they all flew out. They all flew to Edmonton and came to the show. Amit, that's right.
Yeah.
They all flew out to our show too. Like, that's pretty incredible.
Yeah, they flew out for the reunion at the Smugglers show too.
That's amazing. So
yeah, no, it's very incredible, the dedication, and you're not the only musician that would wade in. I always thought it was a good idea too. Dan would do it. The guys from the Matinee would do it. Who's the Rich Coyne from Halifax would get on there and do it. I mean, people realized, here's a really dedicated fan base that I can just communicate directly with.
Yeah.
And they, you're right. Like, they would just love you for it forever.
Let me ask you about your role in that, which I know it's changed and transitioned, and maybe that's part of the explanation or story, but I've had a lot of conversations about curation, and it's not just in the music world, but you were part of what feels like a golden era of curation, but you were handed an opportunity that I think even at that time, at least my outside perspective, was people didn't sort to get to have that much control and say, which is really perhaps what elevates this idea of a curator, of somebody who's actually, it's intentionally not using the word of a gatekeeper, right? It's like just a curator. It's somebody who is a tastemaker like everything's been turned over to the algorithms as the curators is what it feels like modern wise. But that was so, it felt like literally the gate you needed to go through to achieve any version of cred in the indie scene in Canada. In the time, did you actively feel like that's what you were doing?
A little bit. I mean, it's funny. Sometimes I think, like, for whatever reason, I've always been, when I was at Mint Records, we would be deluged with demo tapes.
Yeah.
And it would be like, sign our band, sign our band, sign our band, please sign our band, please. Or when we did all ages shows, Nardwar and I, it would be like, can our band play? Can our band play? And then at Radio 3, it would be, play our music on the radio, play our music. And still that happens to an extent. But, so everyone's pitching everyone constantly. Life's a pitch, and it's all over the place. And people are always pitching me. And there's only so much that you can absorb. But I'm not sure if, I suppose we felt, I mean, there was a point at Radio 3 around maybe 2006, 2007, where we were like, the first Polaris Prize came along, and we were very much involved in that. And it was all the bands that were in rotation on Radio 3. So that first Polaris Prize just looks like the year-end list of Radio 3. Yeah. It was like Sarah Harmer, The Deadly Snakes, Wolf Parade, Broken Social Scene, Metric, etc., New Pornographers. I might be blurring the first 2 years. Final Fantasy. So I suppose there was a little bit of that, but at the same time, my goal was simply to play the best music, let people know why they should care about the music, and form community, form an audience. And that was it. Like, I didn't like being any sort of like authoritarian or being a gatekeeper or anything like that. I just wanted to share the music, share why it was amazing, and get people to hear it, like build up the audience. And the podcast audience was massive. It was out of control. It was like, over 100,000 weekly listeners, and which caught everyone at the CBC by total surprise. Yeah, again, visionaries behind the scenes, not me. And then the web and live radio was a smaller audience because it was live, and on demand you can listen whenever the hell you want. So that catered to the listening habits a little more than live appointment listening. The audience was smaller, but it was so dedicated and so interesting. And we learned all these stories from all these people, and it was incredibly supportive. You see this sometimes on Facebook now, but if someone was having a bad day on that Radio 3 blog, they'd come on and they would say like, oh man, I just got fired, or, I can't pay my rent or whatever. And I would call it the dolphin effect, because when a dolphin is struggling in a pod, like say there's a dolphin that's sick or whatever, the other dolphins, and this has been documented many, many times, the other dolphins will swim under the dolphin and take turns propping up the dolphin so the blowhole can be above the surface of the ocean so the dolphin won't drown. And that's metaphorically what I saw on that blog, is that other people would rush to lift the spirits of the person that was down. Gets me a little emotional thinking about it, because, the internet is a cesspool most of the time. And it wasn't on Radio 3, and that's what made it so special.
Yeah, I don't even know if it would sound like mythical if I tried to explain that to my kids right now.
Oh, there's a lot of people that like you try to explain it now, and people go like, what? Like, how does that even exist? And yeah, you're right. Like, it's just so nasty now. But And the interesting thing is, there are many, many, many theories about why people are nasty, and one of them is most people point to that you're anonymous. You can create a name that's not your name. Timbit 3000 XOX.
Yeah.
And you can say it whatever the hell you want. What the reversal happened in the Radio 3 community. People did create those funny names, but they didn't hide behind them.
No.
They shared, and it was a very, very human experience.
Yeah.
And there was none of the vitriol and none of the garbage that we see on, whatever, Twitter or stuff like that, or some other sharing platform. So, I always point to it as even at the CBC, within the CBC, when they say, "Oh, our comments, they're terrible," and I say, build community.
Yeah.
You build community. It's just like being in a friendly neighborhood, right?
Yeah.
You say hi to your neighbors. That's what breaks things down.
Yeah.
And that's what makes the neighborhood safer. When you build community, it's all about community, love, family, community, those three words. That's what builds up society.
Well, definitely something that doesn't feel like the algorithms are including in their in their efforts to curate in modern day. So again, with the overlap of your eras, that starts to come to a close. You write a book in 2010. And it feels like the next 10 years are sort of more hallmarked by your books and your writing and stuff than your radio personality, perhaps. I mean, maybe depends on who's watching. But I'm wondering, like, how long was that overlap? Did it feel like, I know you talked about the tears and stuff of Radio 3 ending, but personally, was the changes happening that time, was that a risky or a scary time for you, or did you have a sense
a change is always scary for me, but I was ready for the change of Radio 3 because doing a live show every single day, 5 days a week, is totally exhausting. And the audience seemingly wasn't ready for a change, but I was ready for a change. And I started really focusing on artistic pursuits outside of the CBC, writing my books. I now have, I think, 4 books for adults and 2 books for kids. And I started working on different projects at the CBC. We developed the Canadian Music Class Challenge, which still goes to this day, it's happening right now, actually, where it's all still based in Canadian music lore. We put out a list of Canadian songs and we get teachers to bring the Canadian songs into the classroom and teach the kids, so that kids are learning the Canadian songbook at a very young age. Yeah. And a lot of the songs are plucked from those Radio 3 classics.
That's pretty great.
Bedouin Sound Clash, When the Night Hears My Song, or whatever.
Yeah.
And, Safe and Sound by Hawksley Workman, and any song by Feist. But so that was occupied my time at the CBC for a while. The top 20 I've been doing now for years.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I mean, I basically discovered the entire, literary community and the book community, and had success with that. In fact, my first book, Adventures in Solitude, to this day is still the most, and it was, again, one of those things where people are like, you're writing. I wrote that book about a place that we have essentially a summer cabin, a place called Desolation Sound in British Columbia. And everyone advised me not to. They said, publish the Smugglers tour diaries. That's what everybody knows. You've got them all written, do that. But it's like, oh, why not just I've been entrenched in music for so long that I really wanted to just break free of that and just write about something essentially totally different. And so I immersed myself in that Desolation Sound world, thanks actually to a CBC lockout that happened in the mid-2000s. I ended up spending a lot more time up there and discovering a lot of the stories that I kind of knew as a kid, but they really started opening up for me with an extended period up there. And I wrote that book, and it ended up becoming, to this day, the most successful piece of art that I've ever put out into the world. It was a kind of luck and happenstance. I didn't know, but the magical thing is that people could relate to it.
Yeah.
So they related to a kid being dragged to a wilderness place that I wasn't really that comfortable in when I was a kid, then rejecting it when I was a teenager for rock and roll and bands, and then rediscovering it as an adult and going, oh my God, how could I have forsaken this place?
Well, that's a pretty great arc by itself.
Yeah. And apparently a lot of other people have gone through similar arcs, because I cannot tell you the book's been out for 14 years. I cannot tell you the amount of times that people have come up to me and said, oh, that reminds me of my experience in Newfoundland or in Michigan or in Manitoba or wherever. And I'm like, oh, wow. And, my takeaway from that is people enjoy art that they can relate to,
and stories cross over.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. But I mean, the Tragically Hip are a relatable band because they wouldn't drape a Canadian flag over their shoulders, but they would sing about songs or stories that we could relate to growing up as Canadians. Weaker Than's similar at their lyrics, and Joel Plaskett's similar. He sings about the collective experience. So I stumbled into that with my first book, and it's basically created a career for me based around the stories of Desolation Sound. I've written about other things. I've written about beer league hockey, and I've written about the Smugglers, but the most successful stuff that the stories that people want to hear time and time again at my live shows are always the Desolation Sound stories.
Well, I think that's, you pair that with social media, which at that time it was still, if we are looking back now, relative infancy, right? Like 2010, and you were putting yourself out there, like you could see you on your boat, you know what I mean, in Desolation Sound. Like for me, it made it so easy because I'm of the age group that I could read that book, and my brain could fill all the pictures in with the Beachcombers, right?
Yes, exactly.
So I had this very Canadiana,
there's that common reference,
relativity. Like it all made sense to me, and
the Beachcombers. I grew up with the Beachcombers. So many of us did in Canada, and my dad used to say, my sister and I were like, well, why are we going here? And he said, it's the real life Beachcombers. Okay, kids. So get in the car, let's go. And I definitely played into that, knowing that when I was writing that book, saying, okay, this is like the Beachcombers. And it was and still is really a lot like that.
But it's like saying this actually has been preserved in time. What everybody looks at as a snapshot from a television program is actually preserved in time somewhere. Is very, that to me feels so Canadian. Why that, for some reason, that feels so important to us that it exists.
And in that first book, Adventures in Solitude, I actually purposely did not put dates in it to try to kind of create a sort of a timeless experience, which kind of worked and kind of didn't. But I now put dates in because I kind of want to keep track of where I am and what's happening with stories. But yeah, so it's been the writing side of the writing era chapter of my life has been extremely fulfilling and occupies a lot of my time now. And that Adventures in Solitude thing, like we just put out a kids picture book version of it. Myself and illustrator Ginger and Go just put out this summer. So, I mean, it's still going. Like I'm doing a book signing for it like next Saturday or something. It's still going. I can't believe the longevity of it.
I'm a little interested, and maybe there's nothing in the well to go down after here, but I mean, you have always been a super authentic guy, which is, I think, what also brought you respect alongside of just the good things that you were doing in the music scene. And people really appreciate that. But I know personally that there's a big difference when you sort of have a public persona of being authentic, and then when you have to choose to be vulnerable. And I feel like writing a book, and even the way you just described, you chose to write a book that was about a very personal place to you, that wasn't based on all the things you've built a career on. So who's gonna read this book? Who's gonna care? But it's vulnerable, and I'm wondering if it's felt vulnerable to you to move into that stage of your life of writing, and how sort of that's impacted you.
Yes and no. I mean, I've always leaned on being self-effacing, and I've always leaned on self-depreciating humor. Like I always try to, usually make myself the butt of the joke. Like Radio 3, often I'd open the show or the podcast, with a story of, I remember the first time we played on maybe the second or third podcast, I said, we played a PEI band, might have been 2 hours traffic. And I said, well, the only time I've been on Prince Edward Island, I got punched in the face. And, I told the story, but it wasn't about, it was like an embarrassing moment for me. And it led to a ridiculous series of events. And so I've always tried to kind of be vulnerable and open myself up, be myself, and make fun of myself, like I've always been a kind of a scrawny guy with bad knees and bad eyes, and, make fun of it, like I remember, the band I loved when I was in high school was the Gruesomes, and I really wanted to have like the perfect mushroom, kind of mop top, kind of Ramones, Beatles haircut. And I tried really hard to get that, but my hair is a bit curlier. And so with my glasses, what I often say is I tried to pull off Joey Ramone and Bobby Beaton. And what I ended up looking like was a cross between Jimi Hendrix and Woody Allen in high school. Just a giant afro and giant glasses.
Yeah.
Didn't really work. So I think vulnerability comes fairly naturally to me, and it's worked for me. And I just try to, be honest, be funny. I try to be funny in almost everything I do. Always try to entertain. I just want to entertain audiences. When my hero and dear friend John Mann from Spirit of the West, lead singer, when he was wrapping up Spirit of the West, someone said to him, like, what are you going to do next? And he said, I don't know, just as long as it involves applause. And I thought that was such a honest and beautiful quote, because so many of us in the entertainment industry, we just want to entertain and we want to make people happy, and we seek out that applause, and the applause is the recognition and the acceptance of the art that you're putting forward, whether the applause is a good review, or whether it's a couple of book sales, or whether it's a nice comment, or whether it's literally people clapping in seats with tickets that they bought to go see you. That's all I want to do, is keep those people entertained.
I have a friend who likes to ask people if you'd rather be rich or famous, like just that real basic thing, and was surprised that I'll pick famous every time. Like, I used to sit on a lot of grant juries and awards juries. Like there was one year when I think I probably saw a combination of 650 applications, between everything from the Junos to just like the Western Canadian Music Awards and Factor. And there were all these people and some of them had like pretty good list of accomplishments. Never heard of them. And I remember saying to someone, like, I'm not interested in anonymous success. So I'm interested in applause too. I think it's what drives us at the validation part, for sure.
Mm-hmm. And the anonymity thing can, if you play it right, like Orville Peck or The Weeknd, can also lead to huge success. So, there's all sorts of different ways to play it, and it's always interesting to see who can make it work for them.
So how has being a dad impacted like where you're at now with the writing? I know you've produced children's books, and there's obvious influences in just opening a perspective there, but
well, it's funny you should ask, because a note just pinged up on my screen saying, you got to pick up the kids in 20 minutes.
Well, there we go.
So, so that's how it impacts me.
Yeah.
It limits my time to do stuff of my own nature like this. But no, I mean, the kids are amazing. I love, already my son, as you saw with the music, he's way ahead of where I was. He's way ahead of me on hockey. He's a great little right winger. He, took a while to get going on his offense, but now he's scoring goals.
So you're a hockey dad and a band dad.
A hockey dad and a band dad.
Wow.
My daughter is in Embers, which is the new Brownies. They've that name got
my
canceled.
girl did all that as well.
Yeah, and and she's in circus and gymnastics and hip hop dance and all that, and they're both great artists, and we are primarily during the week a screen-free family. So the kids, neither myself or Jill played video games when we were growing up. So there's no video games around our house at all. And so what's weird is that my kids are growing up with less screens in their lives in a screen generation than me and my wife Jill had when we were growing up, because we of course had the television, and we had, I had get home after school and it would be like, all the reruns, right? Like Three's Company, Love Boat, Brady Bunch, MASH, like all the way to dinner time.
Yeah. And
my kids don't do that. My kids do other things. They do art, and it's weird. Like, I'm like, Jill, we're like Amish over here. Like, this is kind of unnatural.
But that'll be pretty interesting to see what that produces. I think that's pretty
exciting. I mean, it could hopefully, they're 11 and 8, so hopefully they don't rebel like crazy hard and become super gamers when they're teenagers. But so we've just never been into the video game thing. It has basically ostracized my son in certain ways, because what we've realized is a huge part of kid vocabulary involves video games, literally, and TikTok, and
the socialization is built on the lingo. So
so he doesn't know the lingo.
Yeah.
And he picks it up and he's like, what does that mean? And he's telling me, Dad, what does Sigma mean? I'm like, I don't know. And so I feel guilty in that regard, but my wife is always like, no, it'll be fine. And other parents who's of the similar age, whose kids are like addicted to video games or screens, they're always like,
they'll be fine.
Don't introduce it, because it's hard to get the toothpaste back in the tube, once the kid is like addicted to Fortnite or whatever.
They'll move into a more social era of their life, and whatever comes with it will come with it. So
and I always tell Josh, you're gonna find your people, and he has.
That's great.
But I'm like, you put it out there. He's very shy and somewhat embarrassed that he doesn't play video games. But I'm like, there are other kids, and if you say it, like, I don't play video games, so I don't really get that reference. There will be a kid in that group that will say afterwards, hey, I don't play video games either. And then there's
you find your
the
people.
bond,
100%.
I mean, that's what alternative culture is all about. That's what like everything on this wall behind me is about.
Yeah.
Is stepping out of the mainstream and going your own way and finding your own people.
Yeah.
Uh-oh.
Well, that's beautiful. That's a great note to end on. You have places to go, and anyhow, let me just end Grant by saying just how much I appreciate you taking the time to kind of pull the veil back on a couple of these things. I think the way that your life kind of blended from one thing to the next is the part of your story that I think really matters to people who, aren't sure of how to change lanes themselves, and to see all the great things that have happened is just really cool. And I guess I would be remiss to ever say, because I never know when I'm going to bump into or see you again, that I always feel like I want to thank you for giving like me your attention and giving us your attention in a time when that was the highest currency that I could
Oh,
try to
well,
attain. So
but
it meant a lot.
you put out the art. You put the art out into the world. So, it's my job to promote it.
Well, that's the thing about what this is. It's when everybody looks at it the same way about how we're working together on that, it can be really beautiful. So I appreciate those moments.
I mean, I know we're wrapping up, but one of the things that people forget is that the media, it's a machine that needs to be fed.
Yeah.
And what we feed on is stories, and in particular, the entertainment side of media, we feed on new music and stories. And we need your art. We need the new music. We need it. We got to shovel the coal into the mouth of the furnace to keep everything going. And so sometimes people forget that. It's like, I'm looking for new music to play every single week.
Okay, before we go, what's one new thing that you've discovered? What's the latest thing that you're like, oh, people should hear this? Like
Cat Clyde. I love an artist named Cat Clyde.
Okay. Awesome.
Cat Clyde is a performer from Stratford, Ontario, and she plays this super cool kind of roots country rockabilly, but it sounds modern and it sounds throwback at the same time. She is one of the coolest musicians that I have discovered recently, and I think everyone should know and check out Cat Clyde.
That's awesome.
CC.
Okay, I'm gonna do it.
Okay.
What I love is that you're forever gonna be my DJ and my curator, Grant. And
thanks, Glenn.
What a great way to end.
This has been a great conversation. I really appreciate you taking me through all these different stages of my life and stirring up all these memories and emotions. So it's much appreciated. Yeah. The last thing I'll tell you about these classes, they're also they're the Frontier. This is a make called Vinylize, and this is AC/DC record.
Oh, really?
That's
fantastic.
That's on there. You can see the grooves.
Oh, I love it.
There's the guitar pegs on the side.
Oh my
but
goodness.
Anyway,
that's really cool.
So music, rock on.
Always.
Thanks for everything.
Thanks,
and
bud.
I'll go coach some baseball now.
Hey, I'm Alexi. Stick around for post fame with me and my dad.
Hi.
Yeah.
How are you doing?
I'm okay. How are you?
I'm fine. Welcome to episode 2, Lawrence, and this is Post Fame.
Yes.
With you, my daughter Alexi, joining me to talk about the episode. So, before we get into the episode with Grant Lawrence, lots of new things going on. When we recorded the first Post Fame, it was 2024.
Yeah. True.
And we decided to leave everything on the computer until 2025 and just start now. So we're into 2025. What has been the most interesting new thing about 2025 for you?
How many weeks in are we? 2 in a day.
2 in a day. Yep.
2 in a day. A new semester is pretty exciting, but that's just such a boring answer. So I'll say going to the gym with you, because that's a bit more interesting.
That's a great answer. That's an absolutely great answer. So we decided to, it's a little on the nose, a little cliche to start on January, like it's a resolution, but
I know.
It actually wasn't a resolution at all for us. It was really an act of convenience and necessity. One is I'd been far too sedentary for a number of months, and you kids were concerned about your parents getting old. I don't know, but and your schedule changed and demand for vehicles. So I think it's working well. We're on week 2 of going to the 3 days a week, first thing in the morning. So
just did number 5 together.
Yep.
Yeah.
I think it's going fine so far.
I think it's going good. Other than the fact that it's messed up my Spotify rotation.
Because you're playing workout mixes all the time?
Yeah. My curation you and Grant Lawrence talk a lot about curation and DJ. My Spotify algorithm is terrible now. I need a new DJ. It's so bad.
No.
But
Uh-oh. Well, I'm listening to the same podcast mostly every morning while I'm working out. So
really,
yeah, so nothing's really changed for me. I wondered if it would change because I had built a playlist I called Muscle Makers like over a year and stuff ago from basement workouts, and it's got some real bangers in there. In fact, I should put a couple songs on our podcast playlist from Muscle Makers, the bangers. But like the one I discovered the other day was Ageless Beauty by Stars. I think I played that for you in the car.
And
I was like, why isn't this on my Muscle Maker? That's a banger of a song. And ironically, it's from the era that Grant Lawrence kept talking a lot about. But before we get into Grant Lawrence, one more thing I was going to chat with you about, which was I had a question for you because I came down here and this is 2025. So it's post-Christmas.
Yes.
And I meant to ask you this before what your thoughts were, but I might as well do it like live on the podcast. But so one of my star gifts of the year was from your Auntie Nan.
Auntie Nancy.
And this is I know there's people who are listening, not watching, but a Funko doll. Is that just what it's called? A Funko?
Yeah, like the little plastic figurine even.
Yeah, like these collectibles, right? And they have these giant dolls. And I've seen people who have these in the typical collectible world, they never leave the packaging. So the catch with this one, which makes it such an amazing gift for everyone to know, is my sister-in-law customized it for me. It's called Glenroy. It looks like me. He's holding a guitar and wearing a black toque and black shirt and all. Anyhow, so it's fantastic, this Funko doll. Yeah. But I know it's in the world of collectibles, which means these amazing dolls never come out of the package. And people just have these giant shelves with their Funko dolls. But do I take it out of the packaging? Like, it's not given to me as a collectible. It's a personal customized one. And I
think it would be so cute. I think it would be so cute, just like if on your work desk, or just even how it is right now on your shelf.
I don't mind it in the box.
Looks so good, and it says your name, but you can always just rotate it. You're not checking the box anytime soon.
That is the thing. I don't know if those things even exist outside of the box. Maybe they cease to be anything if they come out of the box. But anyhow, that's the thing I was wrestling with. And then I came in here tonight and I looked at it again. So I thought I'm going to ask you. Okay, well, let's talk about the Grant Lawrence episode, which was a lot of fun for me to do. I don't know. You can tell me what your observations were, but I just have a lot of respect for Grant. He was a big part of sort of a very big phase of my own life in the music business. And it was fun to talk about it. I thought when I've been editing and going back, he really became a historian for a large chunk of that time, going through really what was happening in the Canadian music scene. I thought that was pretty cool, but he was name dropping pretty fast for an era that was partially before you were even born. So I'm just wondering what your thoughts were.
Well, it's like I was saying to you earlier today when we were chatting. It's like, I heard his name be dropped quite a bit just when I was with like you or with you around like kind of the music world, like even just growing up. And like just from that, I knew he was kind of like a deal in that scene and in that world. But yeah, you guys were chatting away and like my little 19-year-old brain was having some hard time catching up a little bit at points just because I didn't know some of the names and the programs. And, he talks about CBC Radio and like CBC music and those things. And those have just never been like prevalent in my world because they aren't really just like a thing for, I won't say like my generation, like this time, because I don't know. But for people my age and like my world, not really a thing. I know what it is.
Well, I think two things. Do you think it is partially because your generation doesn't rely on radio to curate your music for you? Is a big part of it.
1,000%.
And so that role that CBC played, and particularly the kind of unique thing that they were doing doesn't exist anymore. So that's got to be for sure part of that. But I think also, I think that one of the things that just doesn't feel, I'm guessing here, you can tell me what you think, but I'm guessing what doesn't feel also relevant when you say that's kind of not even on our radar anymore is that CBC itself isn't really taking a role in pushing or curating. Well, I should say the indie music. They still have CBC music and they do a lot of really cool different things. But it's definitely not the same version of them sort of helping essentially grow a very, not just a scene, almost like a set of genres or subgenres that could flourish. But there is a great show on CBC called Q, and it's not just music. The host, Tom Power, he's fantastic at his job and great at interviewing. And I go and listen to the podcast samples, about 20-25 minutes long, when he has artists on. So that's pretty cool on that show, but things have definitely changed. So
yeah, I mean at the same time you guys were chatting about it, and there was just a lot that, like, you know, one of you would be telling a story or describing, and then, you know, you guys kind of like could jump in back and forth and be like, oh yeah, this guy, oh yeah, this is his name, oh yeah. And just like also listening to that conversation, I was like, wow, like it's really evident how big that community was, and not in like size, but just like if you were in that scene, just like how much that community meant. And it's like, you know, the curation part, like, I think would be really interesting to have. And it's like definitely like because of radio and however you want to describe it, like that's not really a thing anymore, especially for my generation. And, you know, it's never been something where I'm like, wow, I wish I had, you know, CBC radio. I wish I had the radio to listen to when I have like the convenience of like Spotify, for example. But then you guys like have this like whole community you're talking about and like referring to the same like people, and like how there was like weddings and parties and barbecues, and like how it just like brought people together. And I was like, oh, like that would be cool. And like I think that's lost on my generation for sure.
Yeah, one of my favorite moments when he was talking and he used that metaphor of the dolphins holding the sick ones up, and then he got choked up because he really believed that that's what that community, it was a pure version of sort of online community, which maybe doesn't exist. And I thought that was pretty cool and great. I do think you miss out on curation. I think what's interesting about Spotify is, I mean, you started just casually joking about the algorithm has changed because of your workout schedule. And really, it feels like most of us are treating the algorithm like our curator, right?
Curators?
Like, I mean, and, you know, the truth is we all know, like, Spotify has playlists, and, you know, most of us, though, only see the ones that, you know, they technically are using AI or whatever automations pull from your existing lists to create either genre specific or mood specific or whatever they are playlists for us, right? But they have their own playlists, and yeah, it's a challenging thing. Like, so on the music business side of it, if I'm an artist right now, right?
Yeah.
Like, it makes all the difference to get on to some of the larger playlists. So the playlists that have massive amounts of subscribers, most of them are primarily by employees of Spotify, whose job is it to put these things together, right? And so getting on it has become a whole new game to play. So back when it was Grant Lawrence and I made that joke near the beginning, I think, of our conversation, how Dan and I were scrambling for his attention. Like, that was a massive focus at that stage of our careers, right? And Dan Mangan is who I'm referencing. And so he was our attention because he curated the music. And if we got on the thing, it was pretty huge. So in the same way, I know a lot of artists now, like a lot of from that time I spent doing the development work with the country artists in the province, I see their posts now, you know, and so if they get added to a list, they'll be very quick
it's on their story and they're posting.
And if they land the cover, like if they're publicists, and that's, and again, it's all part of the machine, right? Like you need maybe a good manager, a publicist who has got the right connections and trying to hound people to
Yeah.
get you that placement because it does such a big thing for your career. So it's definitely changed, but it exists kind of the same way, but in a different way. Yeah.
I mean, definitely more machine driven now.
Yeah. Did anything else stick out to you other than the curation part or other parts you
Yeah.
can understand perhaps in your 19-year-old brain and want to work out?
No, I mean, I understood a lot. Maybe I phrased that poorly, but I think the other thing that like really stuck out was kind of less to do with music, but more just like when he was talking about the fact that his family and his kids don't have electronics and the fact that his son already has a band. I was like, I was living for that when I was listening, like, especially being in education. And I was like, yes, like someone's kids, because my generation really, it's like, we're kind of like one of the first to go through
Mm.
childhood and development with screens all the time in our faces. And then, the generation like just above mine is starting to have kids now and we're like seeing those effects. Um, and even just being a waitress, I see the effects of children behavior all the time. But
Oh, yeah.
I think it's just so interesting how creative his kids sound. And especially seeing his son like having a band in 11 and having Grant Lawrence be your dad and be able to like help you put that together and have shows. I think that was the loveliest thing ever.
Yeah, and I mean, he didn't really talk about it much, but I mean, he's married to Jill Barber. So Jill Barber is a
Also an artist, correct?
national name as a
Yeah,
singer. She's had some like award-winning Juno type level jazz albums as well as
right.
and so she is a well-known name around the country, an incredible artist on her own. So you just know that there's this sort of presence of that in that household. But yeah, the thing with his son and the band, it made me think, like where's the real version of the new punk rockers going to come from in the
Mhm.
new generation, right? If you need, because a lot of that kind of stuff comes from people that were trying to like either break free of something or they were just kind of raised counterculture, and
Mhm.
being raised without screens is as counterculture as it can possibly get at this
Yeah,
moment in history, right?
yeah.
So I guess just what really shocked me is like I wasn't surprised that his kids wanted to play music,
No,
considering the nature nurture whatever the environment is
for
pretty
sure.
ripe for it if the seed's already there. But the age though, like 11 years old,
11 years old.
and I went to his socials and he had posted like a little bit about this gig that they were prepping for and showed these like 11-year-old boys and stuff in a
I
circle in a
love
living
it.
room practicing. And I was just like, this is amazing. Like that's really young. Like at 11 years
Yes.
old, well, I don't even know what I was doing. And I think I was
No.
like trying to jump the furthest off a swing to impress girls when I was 11 years old.
Mhm.
Like that didn't pay off very well in my life. Playing in a band at 11, that's pretty great. So
Yeah,
I'm impressed.
I thought so.
Yeah, that's a great observation, actually. I think one of the great things about Grant that I appreciated in the interview, and a big part behind why talking and finding these stories and these conversations is important, or at least the spotlight that I want to start to shed more is
Mhm.
all the different paths that you take over the long haul, that it's not a short game, it's a long game. And we
Yeah.
usually think that we're in a certain lane in our life and then things change and then you end up in another lane, but there's still a big piece of the last lane in you. And to end up now where he's at, at around 50,
Mhm.
being primarily a hockey and a band dad and an author,
I was gonna
but
say,
but still connected to his music stuff and his roots that come in handy, that now he's teaching his kid how help book shows, and he has
Yeah.
to book his own book tours, and then he brings his old musician friends along for these sort of evenings of music and story.
hmm
And that goes back to the early days in his 20s when you have to kind of hustle again. And it's kind of full circle. And I
Yeah.
think that was really something I reflected on afterwards that I thought was pretty great.
And what a beautiful spot to be in, that he can be doing all that. Like, I feel like every 10, 20 minutes in that podcast, it was like, oh, and you're doing this. Oh, yeah. And you did this. Oh, yeah. Like,
Yeah.
he has done a lot. He knows a lot. I think, yeah, definitely a good source of knowledge for that.
Yeah. And he cares a lot, which is maybe that was really what's underneath why
hmm
his ability to accomplish and do all those things is because he didn't half-ass anything. I think it just reminds me that the people who really just give themselves 100% to a thing tend to be able to do the thing, and they get
Oh,
the
yeah.
thing back. So playing it safe doesn't create the opportunities of a life like that, so he's a
Yeah.
great example. Yeah, I like
I
it.
agree.
Good stuff.
Me too. Very good
Yeah.
stuff.
Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you for this.
Yeah.
Is there any, I was going to ask you if there's any new songs I should be aware of or I'm missing. And there was one that you've played a couple of times. Darn it. And I'm using my phone as a camera, so I can't go and look it up because I've been trying to go and find it. Oh, no, I did find it. Is it the one I asked you about? Is it the Joe P song I asked you the other day?
You
And
can't
were
just say the Joe B song when I'm listening to him so much right now.
I know, but I need to know which song it was. Darn it. Okay, I can't remember. I can't think of a single prompt to help you narrow down
I was going to say I can have my
which
phone,
Joe
but
P song it was.
here, I'm pulling my
But I,
phone out. So
but I
no judgment.
specifically asked you, and I'm like, is this? There's no judgment for you pulling your phone out right now. What do you mean?
Screenager.
Oh, that's. I'm literally asking you a question. It's like,
I think you're wrong. I don't think it.
you don't.
Oh,
I swear it was
no.
B.
I think it's "Don't Wanna Love You" by Joe P. Because
Okay.
that one doesn't sound like him, and I think this was our conversation the other day. Is
Okay.
that I
Say
was
the name
playing it,
again.
and you said "Don't Wanna Love You" by Joe P.
Don't Wanna
That
Love.
being said, I could be wrong right now.
Okay, well, I'm going to have to go look it up after this. So if it is,
If it is,
I'm going to put it on our playlist. And the link to our Spotify playlist for Almost Famous Enough is going to be in the show notes and liner notes everywhere, plus on our social. I'm going to build like a little link tree thing for our social and get that everywhere so that it'll be on the website thing too. So people can find the Almost Famous Enough playlist, and we'll keep growing it with music of people who visit us and guests and bands that we talk about or drop.
Yeah, I was going to say our fun mentions.
Yeah, everything that we get to share. It'll be fun to just keep pumping that playlist full.
Perfect.
Yeah. And I don't know what we do with a playlist like that. Do you take people out eventually so it doesn't become like terribly huge, or you wait till somebody gets canceled and then they get pulled off the list?
I was going to say wait until they mess up.
Yeah.
I feel like it's so rude. I feel like if they've been on a podcast, you can't take them out. That's like a disservice.
Well, not the artists. No, just the mentions. I don't know. We'll see.
Just the mentions.
Okay.
We'll see what the vibe curated is.
Exactly. That's the point. Okay. This has been fun. Thank you.
Always. Yes. Thank you for the ring light. I feel so much better now.
Yeah, you're welcome. Mine's feeling good too. Okay.
Love it. Okay,
Thank you. Love you. Bye-bye.
Love you. Bye.